Well, joining me to discuss this and more are Colonel Richard Kemp. He's the former commander of British forces in Afghanistan, and Reserves IDF Brigadier General Relik Shafir, former Air Force Base commander, one of Israel's legendary Top Guns. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Richard, I don't know what kind of ceasefire this is. I said it seems to be a lot more about shooting than talking. But how does this impact the situation? Clearly, the Iranians seem to be playing for time. How does the situation either work to their advantage or not?
Yeah, well, this is a war during a ceasefire, which is not untypical in the Middle East, as you know. And I think we can expect to see more of this kind of military action going on, even as supposed negotiations unfold. I think the United States is playing it right from the perspective of continuing military pressure on Iran. Many US administrations would have not done that. But I think it's the only language really Iran understands. And so if anything, the more military pressure that can be continuously applied on Iran during the ceasefire, the more likely it is that Iran is going to effectively cave into the United States in some form.
Right. But let's talk about that form, Relik, because a focus seems to have been shifted on reopening the Strait of Hormuz, which is an issue certainly of concern, global concern, but of less concern to Israel than other factors, the nuclear program, and, of course, some other issues that seem to have almost dropped off the negotiating table, the restricting of also Iran's ballistic missile program and its support for its terror proxies. How concerned should Israel be? We hear in private Prime Minister Netanyahu is very concerned, but he's not airing those public yet.
Well, I think we need to look at Iran as being experts in a bazaar. When you're a seller in a bazaar, unlike if you're at the Bloomingdale's, you eye the buyer, you have to assess how much you can sell, what should be the initial price, and how to run the in and outs of the negotiations before he walks away, and then you chase him and bring him back. So they're very adept at this, and their foreign minister had actually written a book on how to make a deal following Trump's book. So what I think they're doing is they're pulling for time, and they're ready to get hit and eventually cave into the nuclear demands, be it what they may, but not deal with either the proxies or the ballistic missiles. This is, I think, their strategy. And so they will run as much as they can with this type of negotiations and eventually cave in, but only on the nuclear plan. This is something we've seen in 1988 in the war with Iraq by Khomeini. So I think this low-intensity conflict, what we call LIC, that is lower than a full blow-up, and the Iranians can't really shoot either Israel or the Gulf states because it's too low of a firing, so it's not a full war, LIC, and the more patience you have, the better your situation will be, which I think is right for President Trump, because at this time, he doesn't take the heat from in the United States from the internal politics and the upcoming elections and Mondial, etc.
Right, and Richard, even if that would be the situation, and we're not even sure that Iran will even concede on the nuclear issue, especially the removal of that enriched uranium, and there's talks about diluting it, but keeping some of it on Iranian territory. Obviously, that still leaves the Iran regime in place. That leaves it's sort of like campaign, be it the shadow war or however you want to phrase it, against Israel. Is that just delaying an inevitable return to war, certainly with Israel, but then yet may draw in either the region or the globe?
I think short of regime change, we're not going to see significant movement from Iran. I think it really requires that, and how that's brought about is another question. But whatever Iran may agree to in any negotiations, whether it be on ballistic missiles, proxies, or the nuclear issue, we obviously can't take that as being the reality. They're adept at concealing their real intentions. They're adept and they're very practiced at making agreements and then reneging on them, which I think we have to assume they'll do. So the reality is, whatever the United States decides to do as this thing draws to some form of conclusion, Israel will still be in the fight. I have no doubt about that, unless there's a regime change. Israel will still have to keep doing what it's been doing to Iran for many years now and degrading its capabilities. And as far as the proxies are concerned, as far particularly as Hezbollah is concerned, that's another fight that Israel will have to keep fighting. As we know, the IDF have expanded their operations in Lebanon in the last day or so. And I think we're going to see an even greater stepping up of...
Right. I want to leave Lebanon for a minute. We'll get to it in a minute, but I want maybe to pick up on Richard's point about the Israel will have to keep doing what it's doing. How much latitude will it have? Certainly, as I said before, covert operations or attacking proxies, but we've seen the war shift, the battle against Iran shift more openly. How much will freedom to do it, and how much will maybe opportunities will Israel have, for example, for new defense partnerships potentially, for example, with the Gulf states?
Well, if you were Iranian, what you would do is, if Israel takes active actions, you shoot at the Gulf states, not at Israel. Put pressure on them to press the U.S., which is basically what Iran did during this part of the war, the end part of the war. More missiles were shot at the Gulf states than at Israel. That, unless the United States was ready to keep going on, maybe even boots on the ground, they knew that if they would pressure the Gulf states, they would pressure the United States, which is what happened. So they're playing their cards on the Hormuz states and hitting their neighbors as a leverage point, and they can last. They think they can last longer than President Trump can with the high oil prices, and that remains to be seen. At least that's what they talk about. And I think Israel will be limited to what it can do, because it will actually not be just Iran versus Israel. The Iranians know their game. So I'm pessimistic on that one.
Rich, I want to ask you, the UK, after being somewhat passive in this conflict, one argues, reportedly is now preparing some kind of operation to clear the Strait of Hormuz. There are going to be new arrangements that are coming out of this war regarding the Gulf. Europe is probably much more even invested in that directly than, for example, even the U.S., which has its own oil and gas resources. What should European countries, especially the UK, be doing? What do you think, though, they'll be doing?
Well, I'm not optimistic that the UK will do anything, nor other European countries will do anything that will seriously impact what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, and particularly not while this kind of conflict's going on. We've heard it before from Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, who says, I will send a coalition of the willing to help keep the peace in Ukraine, but only with American security guarantees and only after the war's over. So I think there's a lot of talk going on in European capitals, and I don't expect to see very much action. And one of the problems that Britain and other European countries have is that their politicians, their political leaders, feel bound by a very large Islamic element of the population, which are among their key supporters. And they don't want to take it, and that accounts to a large extent for why they have been very, very passive during this conflict. I think even if it had just been between the US and Iran and Israel hadn't been involved, we may have seen Britain getting involved. But for British politicians with their Islamic supporters, Israel is toxic, and they couldn't possibly come in on the side of Israel in any conflict.
Yes, and that certainly is unlikely to change in the near
Unlikely.
future. Well, gentlemen, we've mentioned another conflict that is certainly interrelated with the Iranian conflict, and that is the war against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Now, it's become almost a daily occurrence, the killing or wounding of IDF troops in South Lebanon by Hezbollah kamikaze drone attacks that are also threatening communities along Israel's northern border. It's the heavy price being paid to destroy the terror group's military assets and infrastructure in South Lebanon, and Prime Minister Netanyahu has had enough, ordering the IDF to advance north beyond the yellow line of the current security zone. But will this prove effective against Hezbollah's drones? And how are U.S. restraints on Israeli actions impacting the IDF's effectiveness? Here's Prime Minister Netanyahu.
בהנחיה שלי ושל שר הביטחון, יחד עם הרמטכ"ל, אנחנו מעמיקים את הפעולה שלנו בלבנון. צה"ל פועל עם כוחות גדולים בשטח ותופס שטחים שולטים. אנחנו מבצרים את רצועת הביטחון כדי להגן על יישובי הצפון. במקביל אנחנו מקיימים מאמץ לאומי ענק כדי לקדם פתרונות יצירתיים וחדשניים נגד רחפני הנפץ. אנחנו מגבים, משבחים את המפקדים והחיילים הגיבורים שלנו, הם נמצאים עמוק בשטח, אנחנו סומכים עליכם.
Relik, Prime Minister talking tough there, Israeli troops advancing, but still there are reportedly these U.S. restraints preventing Israel from directly striking Beirut. So how far can the IDF go, and how effective can more just advancing into Lebanon be as an answer, for example, to these drone attacks?
Well, the drone attacks are, there are two kinds. There's one that is radio controlled, can be heisted from the Israeli side, or blocked because it uses radio frequencies transmissions. But the problem is with a fiber optic wire that those drones can travel almost 15 kilometers with a rolled up cable, very thin one at that. And that there is one weapon that is being developed by the United States and maybe other countries as well, a microwave RPV that actually cooks the circuits on those in those drones. But that is not operational yet. So the only way is to distance the Hezbollah far enough from the border area so at least they cannot hit the civilians along the border. And that's about 15 kilometers, which means that going over the line. This is actually a translation of what the IDF is doing.
But just to be clear, doesn't that open the soldiers in the field more to these attacks? Just as unfortunately we've seen, as an unfortunate comparison, what's happening to, for example, Russian troops in Ukraine against drone attacks.
Yes, and remember, these are quadcopters, pretty small with small munitions. So they're harassment, and I think that's the way it should be. The soldiers should bear the problem rather than the civilians. So we won't have an effective answer to that for quite a while. You know, the Prime Minister gave a directive, and lots of people are working on this, but it's a problem that hasn't been solved in the Ukraine for several years, and I doubt very much that we'll see something within the next 6 months that can take care of that, rather than very primitive defenses under some kind of a cloth roof.
Right.
Or something like that.
Or fishnets, supposedly asking fishermen for fishnets. Right. Richard, that's tactically. Strategically, of course, Israel's concern is the linkage of the battle against Hezbollah with the negotiation talks with Iran, and the concern that basically Iran will insist on that linkage, and eventually Israel will even have to withdraw from its current position in Lebanon, and that will give Hezbollah a chance to regroup. And what is the answer there? I mean, the international community may be relying on the Lebanese army, reformed Lebanese army, to take on Hezbollah. How likely is that going to be?
I think it's very unlikely that the Lebanese army is going to be able to properly take on Hezbollah. And we are going to see the continuation of this conflict, in my view, for the foreseeable future. Obviously, it's very important that that Iran is prevented as much as possible from allowing Hezbollah to be rebuilt. And that obviously feeds in very much to the negotiations going on. I believe, and I have no specific insight into this, but I believe that President Trump fully understands this problem, and I don't think he will, I mean, I may be wrong, I don't think he will handcuff Israel to withdraw from Lebanon while Israel's in so much danger now. But it's really got to be a combination of continued hard military action by Israel against Hezbollah. Whatever can be done to persuade the Lebanese government and the Lebanese armed forces to themselves take action, and maybe even, it's possible, the kind of unexpected, maybe bringing in al-Sharaa from Syria, who also is deeply opposed to Hezbollah. Maybe he can have some effect on it. Maybe it will
Well, you know, there's not many in Israel that trust
No.
President or Giuliani, as he's referred to more.
Nor do I. And they're right not to trust him. But I can see worse scenarios than Giuliani's people coming up against Hezbollah's people and maybe dealing with each other.
I'm looking at the big picture, Relik. We have a situation of ceasefires with Iran imposed by the U.S., ceasefires in Lebanon opposed by the UN, ceasefires in Gaza imposed by the U.S. Now, in all these situations, President Trump is allowing a certain latitude to the IDF, but this is a kind of unprecedented situation for Israel, that it's gotten the benefits of cooperation with the U.S. military, but it's also accepted on it constraints. Is that something of concern, like looking at the bigger picture in the longer term for Israel?
Oh, most definitely it is. But let's roll back a little bit. Since 2006, until the war broke out in October, there was a ceasefire along the border with the Lebanese. We knew that Hezbollah is out there, but there were no conflicts. Nobody was shooting. Because there was an agreement, and a quiet agreement, so to speak, between the two countries. Now, if the Iranians reach a deal, and they will also be responsible for pacifying Hezbollah, then we might have some kind of a deal where if Hezbollah are active on the Lebanese front, the U.S. will draw the payment in the Gulf.
Right.
So I think what they're doing is they're trying to get a big deal that will leave Hezbollah with some power in Lebanon. Israel is not going to conquer Lebanon. There are over 1 million refugees from the South Lebanon within Lebanon itself. So there's a lot of pressure on the Lebanese government. And what the colonel just mentioned, the Syrians. Well, Israel has some playing cards at the Golan Heights and the Hermon, where we've gone beyond the international ceasefire line. A deal with Ashara, where we withdraw back, and he takes care of the Bekaa Valley. And he's got a lot of accounting to do with Hezbollah.
Sure.
So a kind of a deal where the enemy of my enemy is my friend, which is very common in the Middle East since the biblical times, is possible here. So until the whole deal actually takes form, I think we're going to see this low-intensity conflict and disillusion before things come to rest. I don't think President Trump cares much about Israel's problems in the Galilee, to be honest. But if we insist and play our cards right and make some moves with other countries around, then this kind of settlement could be forward. It'll be less than what we thought of or what we imagined, and we're still not talking about Gaza.
All right. Well, gentlemen, Trump in his first term talked about a deal of the century. In his second term, it's a very different kind of deal. The deal of the century may just be a ceasefire until the next conflict. That's so often the case in the Middle East and with Israel. Colonel Richard Kemp, General Relik Shafir, thank you so much for joining us on ILTV Security Brief.
Thank you.